Good evening. Hello. Welcome, everybody. As always, great to be with you. Great to see that we have smiles on our face. We are embarking on another experience of A Course in Miracles, which is a liberation teaching. And the important thing about being a student of a liberation teaching is to first know that you're imprisoned. Otherwise, what's the point of seeking out a liberation teaching? That's why Jesus says in the Course, you have to get to a point where you know you're miserable. And then you'll realize that happiness is a choice and a possibility, but you're not at that place of choice yet. And so let's recognize that the miracle is just a choice away for all of us tonight, and that we can transcend our self-imprisonment in what he calls a twinkling of an eye, right? Using that familiar passage from the Bible. And so this idea that we are not awake yet is going to be the theme of tonight's talk. It's part 2, actually, from last week, where we were exploring the awakening of the spiritual eye. So we're going to get into that, but before we do, Lisa has an opening lesson to share.
Yeah, something that we have to just really, really hammer down. And it's right, as Lisa, can't forgive. Right? Because you can just hear yourself sometimes when you ask Holy Spirit, you're still thinking you're that person forgiving another person. The other person we're kind of getting now, right? Like, okay, they're just my thought form, right? So I'm not making them a real person. But it's still not going to work. We want to go deeper than that, right? And understand that I too am a thought form. Lisa does not exist. Right? Because as long as I'm thinking and believing I'm Lisa, I can't forgive anybody, because what happened in the dream did happen to Lisa. She did experience that. So I might say it conceptually, right, that I forgive that one, but as long as I'm identifying as her, it's just going to be conceptual, and there's going to be no healing. Right? The invitation, we have help, the Holy Spirit can help us, but the invitation to that help is the understanding that I'm looking at 2 false ideas, right? Both thought forms don't exist, right? I am as God created me, spirit, one with him, as is that one. Right now, I'm just looking at my thought. I want to know myself as he created me. And the way I can do that is by forgiving that thought form, remembering that they're not real, and in that I remember who I truly am. Okay, so we're just always saying, right, I can't forgive as Lisa. It's not working. That's why.
And they would use a different name, right? When they say, yeah, so the ego doesn't forgive. And in fact, what Lisa's saying is going to be borne out in our conversation tonight. That when we awaken our spiritual eye, we will see a completely different world. But before we get into that lesson, does anybody have any thoughts or feedback? Good. Okay. Let's open to the introduction. And so as we begin the study of our course tonight, let's remember that miracles are our natural inheritance. And he actually says to us that we are a miracle, that our creation is actually an act of God, and it is a miracle. We are the miracle of God. And so as we begin to open our hearts and our minds to the lesson tonight, we want to embody that truth for ourselves. Even if we don't understand it, you can still accept it. Right? And as you accept it and welcome the possibility of experiencing it, the Holy Spirit will do the rest. Just don't put anything in the way of your experiencing that. That's what's really important, that we are going to empty our cup, and we're going to open our heart and our mind to the possibility of a divine intervention. That's really at the heart of this teaching. Remember, this teaching is not what your ego can learn to be a better ego in the world. It's to wake up in the present moment as the light and truth of God, okay, which is your joy and your peace. Introduction. This is a Course in Miracles. It is a required course. Only the time you take it is voluntary. Free will does not mean that you can establish the curriculum. It means only that you can elect what you want to take at a given time. The Course does not aim at teaching the meaning of love, for that is beyond what can be taught. It does aim, however, at removing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence, which is your natural inheritance. The opposite of love is fear, but what is all-encompassing can have no opposite. This course can therefore be summed up very simply in this way. Nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. So we're going to begin our readings tonight on page 1945 in the complete and annotated edition, which is a glossary at the very back of the book. And we're looking for the entry on page 1945, vision, and then there are other terms that are associated with vision. Christ's vision, and the other included there is true perception. And so here is an explanation of that. An inward seeing. So what is vision? It's an inward seeing of the holiness within all things, which overlooks bodies and their attacks. This perception comes not through our eyes, but from a spiritual faculty in us, called the eyes of Christ, called the spiritual eye, early in the text. Rather than seeing the projections of the ego, vision sees everything as it truly is, perfect. Rather than seeing visual forms or color, vision sees pure meaning, the meaning of holiness. Vision is the goal of the course. If you're underlining or highlighting, you might want to put some marks on that. Vision is the goal of the course, a kind of perception so holy that it transfers to knowledge. Okay? So this is what we're exploring tonight. Remember, the course is experiential. It wants us to literally wake up, and the way that we wake up is we become less and less reliant on our physical senses, and we awaken this spiritual faculty, our inner senses, that can literally perceive or know, really first perceive spiritual reality. And that spiritual reality is where we no longer see a body, because we recognize we're not a body. That's why we would be seeing our brothers and our sisters and all living beings in a state of holiness, because we would be in a state of holiness. So this is a radical transformation from which what we are used to seeing are the projections of our own ego. So notice the connection he makes here. Your 5 physical senses are not seeing. He calls it an image-making process. Your 5 physical senses are simply perceiving or selecting out what you've already predetermined to identify with and believe. And so you're seeing through your physical eyes what you've sent them out to see or show you. He says that's image making. That's not seeing. So we will awaken a different kind of vision, a different kind of perception, and the light that comes on will be an understanding. You're not going to see forms and colors. You're going to experience the very essence of who someone is and their true nature. Right? And it will be an immediate intuitive knowing, gnosis. Okay? Anything you want to add? Any thoughts, questions, comments before we move on?
I have a comment. So when it comes to my five senses, I think about it. So sometimes when my ego's seeing something that it's perceiving as bad or negative, I can handle it. But like when I see the sunset or things that bring me joy, I'm like, this isn't real. But that's how I used to go see God, like that I knew God existed. So it's kind of hard when it's so beautiful that I'm like, no, it's not real. That's all. I can't, it's hard for me that way.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that you discredit what you're experiencing when you're seeing the joy of the sunset. But what you're also becoming aware of is that the joy of the sunset is God's joy. It's an inner experience. The joy doesn't exist out there in the sun. It's an experience that you're having inwardly. And that joy, you could say all joy, is God's joy. All happiness is God's happiness, right? And that sun is a symbol that could, in that moment, remind you or echo or reflect the divine presence, symbolize it, represent it in some way, right? All of creation, when seen clearly or perceived with vision, is a reflection or an echo of God's light, right? So there is a sense there that we know this intuitively. So it doesn't discredit or devalue that in the least. It just allows us to know that it's not out there. And it's not the sun, it's actually a reflection of God's truth.
Thank you.
Yeah. Again, to be experienced, I don't want to pontificate up here. Any thought? Anybody else? Thoughts, questions? Okay, let's move on then. Page 29, or actually 28. That's in chapter 1. So remember and this kind of goes back to what Tony was saying, what this spiritual vision is going to do, it's going to show the unity of being. Right? There's no separation. Everything is an expression of God's light and God's love and God's power and God's glory. And so when we awaken to this divine vision, we will know that and we will see that in all things. He actually says at one point in the text that a blade of grass becomes a thing of wonder. Like you'll begin to see the interrelatedness and interpenetration of all living beings through all living beings. Right? There is a divine beauty that is permeating everything that we're not seeing through our ego projection, but vision will show it to us. Okay? So page 28, we're looking at principle 38. The spiritual eye is the mechanism of miracles, because what the spiritual eye perceives is true. The spiritual eye perceives both the creations of God and the products of human beings. Among the latter, the products of human beings, the spiritual eye can also separate the true from the false by its ability to perceive totally rather than selectively. It thus becomes the proper instrument for reality testing, which always involves the necessary distinction between the true and the false. So in other words, the spiritual eye is a vision that has the template or the knowing, the intuitive imprint of God's truth. That is its way of seeing. It's seeing through God's light. And so whatever it's seeing, it immediately can recognize the frequency or the resonance or the presence that is in alignment or association with the divine being. And whatever is out of alignment with the divine being, it immediately knows it to be false or unreal. So there's no deception in the spiritual eye because it has its communication open to the divine vision. It sees with the Holy Spirit's light. That's your natural inheritance. It's the goal of this course. He says you'll start to have light episodes when you really begin to thin out the ego's false way of thinking and no longer buy or believe your projections as real. Right? As soon as you begin to question your projections and distrust your physical senses, you'll have a much easier time beginning to focus internally and interiorizing your sensory experience. Linda?
Can you, what is a light episode?
Well, in the workbook, he describes them as you'll start to see perimeters of light around bodies and objects. And elsewhere, he says you begin to recognize the spark, this glowing presence within the heart of your brothers and your sisters. And as your vision gets clearer, you'll begin to sense what he calls the great rays that actually cause the body to become more and more transparent.
I was thinking of, this week I really got that I was looking at myself and saying, I'm like causing this suffering. I know that I am because I want something to be different than it is. And I just kept trying to breathe and be with it as I recognized it. So I appreciate you just saying again, just to stay with it. I'm ready for it to change like that. So I feel like something is shifting and I can see it and I'm aware of it. It just kind of lingers longer than I like it to.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I hear right now is hands off.
Hands off, hands off. Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Lee?
It's worse than that, it's meaning off.
Meaning
Oh,
off.
very good, yes.
Thank you.
And because it's really important to understand too, like every single thing that we perceive, both good and bad, it has to first be called and seen as meaninglessness. Everything. And it's a good thing to just remember, right? How that mountain or sunset is a reflection, right, of the thought. Like we are constantly, as long as we are believing we're in these bodies and we are bodies, we are always projecting, right? It's just a matter of whether or not we are projecting our unhealed thoughts or we have accepted the healing in our mind of a thought and then we're seeing a reflection of his love. But even the most beautiful thing we ever see, it's always, I'm always thankful that I have allowed myself to receive it, right? It's all God and only God. But we can't start to see, as long as we're seeing fragmentation, right? Even as a blade of grass, that's sleeping, right? It is only after we're able to look at everything and call it meaningless that he can begin to show us that it's one, because we have labeled everything then, right? We're still labeling, but it's all the same, right? And we all have to do that because we're all thinking and giving meaning to our own meaning to the same thing. Like those beginning lessons, if you go back and do them again, really start to, make sense to you. And then, because it does have to make sense for you to really accept it. So maybe at the end, if we have time, we can do a couple examples of that. Just how we never see the same thing. And then take it even deeper to go, wait a second, like I have even changed completely the meaning I've given things. So the only way we will be one is if we are going to the one thought system that is truth, God's, right? Then if we're going to the same source, that's how we experience oneness. But we can't do it, looking for it in fragments. It just doesn't even make sense.
And that gets back to the fact that what we're talking about here, as far as spiritual vision goes, it's the veil of the heart or the veil of the mind gets dissolved, right? The blocks are removed. And when that comes in, you're seeing a very different, it's not intellectual, it's not conceptual, it's not the little you that has undergone an experience that now has some kind of special gifting that can now see something that you, as the little you, couldn't see before. The little you gets laughed away in the light. The little you was a shadow and a confusion in identity. And so when that heart opens and the light becomes clear, you are that light. You are that vision. It's the Holy Spirit seeing with you. And he says this. He says the Holy Spirit will then see the Holy Spirit in all. That's the unity of being. That's the atonement or at-one-ment or attunement. Right? That's where we will be happy again. Because we're in the abundant life, where there is no lack, no gap, no separation, no break. Right? And God fills all with himself, herself. Yeah?
Because there is no you.
There is no you. But there is what he calls the Son of God, which it's what the ego has been aping or pretending to be, right? There is a true, distinct being that Jesus says we are, and that's why the ego can mimic it, pretend it is it. But when we recognize the real I am, it's a completely different reality than the ego's attempting here. Okay. Anyone else?
There's so many, there's so many people who've taught the Course in Miracles who've never mentioned what you're talking about or never explained it that way.
They're just not as good as I am.
I mean, or like seriously.
Well, but now you're ready to hear it, so
Yeah, very good.
there is none, right? It's
Yeah.
just it's just thoughts. We're thoughts, and you just happen to be lucky enough to deliver what you feel like hearing yourself,
Yeah.
accept.
Okay, so let's go to page 77. Is it warm in here?
Yes.
Yes.
But
Would
I'm sure
somebody
you
be
told-
a good Samaritan and lower the thermostat? Anyone?
Where is it?
If we knew where it was.
It's on the back wall. There's one by the sound booth. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Maybe a couple of degrees down. Page 77. And we're looking for paragraph 5. And before we get into the reading, just setting the context a little bit here. So the section is the restoration of the altar. And what is being discussed in this section is that the altar is really the innermost temple or place where our mind senses its home. It's like its homing signal. And it's also the altar is where we are saying, I am from. Okay? It's the inmost part of our being that we sense as our intimate self-nature. That's the altar. And he's saying that the altar needs to be restored because as the ego body identity, we have put an idol on the altar. Right? The body image, the self-image, is not who we are. And so the altar has become an altar to idols. Now you can start to see the esoteric or the hidden or deeper meaning of the Bible, where it says, you shall have no other gods before me. Right? And those who are making idols are displeasing to God. In fact, we're making idols and we're suffering. We're image makers. And so if we have an image of ourself on our altar, we're projecting images. Right? This gets back to what we were saying earlier about we're not seeing through the 5 senses. We're seeing the ego projected out. So as John, I can only see other egos. So you're a body to me. I call you Alex. You're not the Son of God. And by seeing you that way, he says, I crucify you. I murder you. I deny you your birthright as I deny myself. And that's how it starts. It literally starts by how we're seeing one another. Why? Because we're seeing one another from the I am that we think we are. And if we are the body, I am the body, we are fragmenting everyone and denying them their source as we are denying our source. Right? Don't worry about it. Didn't really happen. The altar will be restored. But remember what we said at the beginning of the talk. You have to first recognize this is making you miserable. But see, the ego doesn't want you to recognize that. It wants you to think, okay, well, this is who I am. That's who he is. Now, how do I find happiness and peace? Being who I am. And then the ego will send you on this seeking but never finding in the world of the five senses. And he says you're blind and groping for what can never be found. So the altar has to be first looked at. And you realize that once you begin to see that the altar has been, in his words, defiled by your belief that you are the body, then the Holy Spirit can heal you. But you have to get to that place within yourself first, where you realize the source of all of your problems is I am this body. There's nothing else causing you pain. That's the root of your suffering.
And it's going to throw in some good stuff too. It's not all bad. Otherwise we would be like, I'm out of here and we return to him a lot sooner. So you're going to have things that you love, right? But then you're going to get to, lose them or see them get sick or have them suffer, right? And that's how you know too. It's of the ego. No, even the beautiful relationships that you look back on in your life that, were as perfect gets here. Like I think of, my relationship with my grandmother was the most perfect grandma anybody could ever have, right? Couldn't be more loving, and I couldn't love her more. Yet I see that now, right? To think of that memory, right there, I've already blocked God. Even recalling that memory as two separate people, right? For that to have been a real, experience of God's love, I wouldn't have seen her as another one, right? I would have recognized it as God's love coming through that body, right? No fooling me. And I'll, even just to find now in this moment what we can do, just think of that makes me lose the present moment. My grandmother, as God created her, is here right now with me, in me, part of me, right? So I reduce her by believing or thinking about, even fondly, a loving memory. She's much more than that, right? That's how the ego drags the past into the future, even when it makes you think you have something beautiful. And in that moment, there will be loss, right? Even if you drop it right away. Gee, I missed that, right? I could do it so easy with so many things. Now I'm practicing, as a few of you know, up that level with my Reina, but so clear. And, it's so good to get how vicious it can be using what we thought was love before.
Excellent. Any thoughts here? So what Lisa's saying too, it's so important because in order to have these thoughts of what could have been or what was so sweet but now is gone, any kind of nostalgia or feeling of loss or any of the ways that we can do this, it means that you're not in heaven now. It means that you have to have fallen into darkness in order to have that kind of thought be real to you now. And so this is the sweet siren song of the ego, where, like Lisa said, it can come velvety and smooth and alluring, right? It's your grandma. But this is to up your vigilance, right? Because when we say that heaven and hell are the two choices you make every moment, when you choose heaven and you realize this vision of heaven within you, like Lisa was saying, she's communing with her grandma in a dimension that is always. There is never loss in that dimension, and all life is joined and is immediately in communication. Right? So this is where, again, we're conceptualizing this, but eventually we'll come to a place of knowing that the I am, John, is the I am of God, and the I am that was grandma is the I am of God. And this is going to be true union, right? True joy, no loss. So we're on page 77. And look at paragraph 5. The inappropriate emphasis which people have put on beautiful church buildings is a sign of their own fear of atonement and an unwillingness to reach the altar itself. The real beauty of the temple cannot be seen with the physical eye. The spiritual eye, on the other hand, cannot see the building at all, but it perceives the altar within with perfect clarity. This is because the spiritual eye has perfect vision. For perfect effectiveness, the chalice of the atonement belongs at the center of the inner altar, where it undoes the separation and restores the wholeness of the mind. So remember, the inner altar of our mind right now has the idol of the ego on it. And the ego is a fragmented idea, and its nature is to fragment. So we see gaps between bodies, and we see separate others that are not the self. They're separate selves. And so the atonement will undo that. We can't think of this. We can't understand it. But we have to be willing to undergo the process. Right? This goes beyond intellect. This goes beyond human language and belief and our understanding. Right? So before the separation, the mind was invulnerable to fear because fear did not exist. Both the separation and the fear were miscreations of the mind which have to be undone. This is what the Bible means by the restoration of the temple. It does not mean the restoration of the building, but it does mean the opening of the altar to receive the atonement. This heals the separation and places within you the one defense against all errors which can make you perfectly invulnerable. So don't brush over too quickly the fact that the atonement must come to an open altar, ready to receive. So one of the things that he'll discuss in this section is that all of the ego's defenses, right, all of the I am John, every feeling that I have as John is designed to reject the atonement. John doesn't want the atonement. John doesn't need the atonement. John doesn't believe in the atonement. John is just fine as the body to go looking for other bodies to get what John needs. And that's what John is programmed to do, and that's his instinct, and there's no deviation from that. And it's perfectly logical. If my mind believes I'm John, the atonement's a joke. It doesn't have any truth to it. So that's why you have to become open, right? Surrendered, willing to receive the correction at your innermost place. Remember, interrupt if you have anything. The acceptance of the atonement by everyone is only a matter of time. In fact, both time and matter were made for the acceptance of the atonement. This appears to contradict free will because of the inevitability of the decision. Now, if you're into reading and you have the complete and annotated edition, The cameos in the back are added portions that will go into more detail about certain subjects. And so this idea that time and matter were created to bring about the healing of the mind and bringing everyone back into the atonement. There's a cameo that said, did God create time? It's an excellent read if you guys want to do that on your free time. Okay, so everyone will accept the atonement at some point. This appears to contradict free will because of the inevitability of the decision. Right? Let's go over to page 78 and paragraph 8. So eventually everybody comes to accept the reality of God. And it's because, as he says in paragraph 8, when we are believing in being the ego, we're misusing our will, which is God's will. And the misuse of will engenders a situation which, in the extreme, becomes altogether intolerable. Pain thresholds can be high, but they are not limitless. Eventually, everybody begins to recognize, however dimly, that there must be a better way. Right? Being the ego just gets to be too burdensome, difficult. As this recognition is more firmly established, it becomes a perceptual turning point. And then he says this ultimately reawakens the spiritual eye, simultaneously weakening the investment in physical sight. The alternating investment in the two types or levels of perception is usually experienced as conflict for a long time and can become very acute. Right? That means intense. But the outcome is as certain as God. So what would be, the turning point is I can't take this anymore. This is just, I got to surrender my life. This is just unbearable, right? I'm miserable. I'm tired of feeling like this, whatever the breaking point looks like for you. But even at that breaking point, when the mind begins to accept the higher power or God's truth or whatever way that looks, you're now on that road inward to find yourself, but it doesn't mean the ego is just going to let you go. Now the spiritual battle begins, because you started to actually wake up from the dream that there is a light, there is a world, there is a truth beyond the ego. And the ego is going to fight in your mind so that you don't reach that place. Because if you do, the ego dissolves. So, carrot and the stick, right? The allurements of grandma, or the horrific experiences of somebody who's, the opposite of grandma. It doesn't matter to the ego, as long as you maintain that separation within yourself. So this is where it's a back and forth, a tug of war for a really long time. And what we often will do instinctually when we're fighting within is we project the conflict outside. We can't tolerate it within. So we actually bring about these scenarios where people come into our life to play the villain, to play the abuser, to play the betrayer. And so now it looks like I'm innocent, and this person is the cause of my conflict. It's not me. And so beware of when this conflict gets really intense. It's oftentimes going to show up as a person, events, relationship dynamics, what have you. And that's going to give you the opportunity to externalize it. Remember, this whole section begins on page 76, warning us about our defense of externalization. We like to deny things are inside, and we see them outside. And the awakening process is to realize we're projecting it all. The conflict is within. And the only cure for the conflict is accepting the atonement of the light. Anything? Thoughts?
So, I get, we've been talking about this for a long time. And I'm just now experienced I don't even know how to call it an idea. Idea is not even the right word, but this, what I use the word idea, that I also can't tolerate love within. And I have to project that onto my grandma. Is that,
We're afraid of it. We're afraid of it.
we're equally afraid of love.
Mhm. But to have loving people in your life means you're less afraid, right? Like, not that close, right? Like, I'm love, right? But I'm not quite ready to accept that yet and be
Right.
one with it.
Right.
But the more loving people you have in your life, right, what are they? They're reflections
Yeah.
of what you've accepted, his love, his light into your mind, so you're going to see it out there. But we want to just go all the way. We want to be one with it. That's why the body's got to go. Only light is real.
Mhm.
Light, love, same thing.
Julie?
So, to piggyback on Mary's question, so it's really not the love that is, the love is what we want to accept and bring in and extend and all of that. So it's what Lisa was describing as the nostalgia or the tenderness or the longing. It's still, those kind of feelings are still not love.
Right.
I don't think. I think those are still I'll get it over here.
Special love.
It's a little bit removed from love, so it's still a distraction for knowing that the love is right here, right now, always.
When there's a subject and an object, it's not love.
So that's a little different than what Mary was saying, because that is making it the yearning or the missing or things like that.
So remember, it says the ego has a substitute for heaven. Right? So to keep you in the dream of separation, it uses a counterfeit love, which it calls the special relationship. This is where two bodies confine together outside of the chaos, or apart from the chaos of the world, their own little enclave where they have love in a sick and crazy world. And so the ego's special love is not love. It's, hate disguised as love.
And you started by talking at the beginning about the spiritual eye that's able to discern between the true and the false, so that it can tell. It can tell between the specialness and, no?
Well, it's on the way, but when we are aware of love's presence as it is, there is no more discerning. There is no more of that, because there's nothing that is not you. So as long as there's that, it's not it.
Well, that's why the spiritual eye is still within the dream, right? So it's the happy dream, and you're beginning to wake up to the reality of God's truth, and there's only God. But while you're still dreaming, the spiritual eye is giving you the discernment to see what is not God and what is God, to the point where you can then drop the not God and accept all that is. Yes.
So John, then, so in an interpersonal relationship, you say between husband, wife, whatever, and you come together for companionship and love and all of that, but perhaps when we are truly whole and truly in the I am, we really don't need to look for that. Is that correct?
It doesn't mean that you're not going to be married. It doesn't mean that you're, going to be, a recluse or any of that. But you're going to not see your husband as a body to get your needs met or, any of those games that bodies will play. It'll be what he calls a holy relationship. And it will be used to bring more light into the world.
Then, in tune with that wording, a holy relationship, those kinds of relationships, if you're both not on the same plane,
Sure.
then are short-lived, can be short-lived.
They can actually fragment and break apart, and then you'll go your separate ways. But he says oftentimes when one person begins to, have this perceptual turning about and wants to, wake up, the relationship will go on a different track. And as a result of that, there are going to be now forgiveness lessons. You're going to see why you were matched with this partner. And these deep-seated grievances, insecurities, shadow aspects of your own self that you're projecting onto your partner and blaming your partner for will now be grist for your healing. And so oftentimes relationships, if they can stay the course and not break apart, will undergo this therapeutic shift. You'll still have your ups and your downs, they'll still piss you off, you get on each other's nerves, you'll have, intimate time through the body, whatever that looks like. But deep down, the core of that relationship will now become the Holy Spirit's.
Then he say, I don't know where it is, but that is a very, very high achievement, a holy relationship. And it's never for companionship, right? It's never to get anything. It's you come together because your purpose is clear, that you're awakening to God, right? And you share in that, and it's an agreement that you're both in it for that. So you do help each other with it.
Unless one grows
And the other doesn't.
in different
That's
directions,
possible. That's possible.
which is in my
But
experience.
that parting, right, if it was a holy relationship, would not be one of, it would still be in love. It would still be in love, for it to be a holy relationship. Do we have, relationships to wake up? Yeah. They're all used, every single one. But for it to be a holy relationship, you would be so happy, right? You're not losing, right? You're not losing anyone. It would be.
And it doesn't mean the other person's going to understand. Like you said, if they're not willing to do this deeper looking at themselves, and the relationship just begins to break apart because honestly it just couldn't hold to the new course, then they might still hate you and be pissed and all of that. It doesn't mean at the level of form they're going to understand.
But then it wasn't a holy relationship.
Right, that's what I'm saying. It doesn't have to be like the breaking up is a good thing for them. Or even, you'll wrestle. Because what we're doing is we're starting out in the muck and the mire, all of us. And so he says the conflict will be very intense within us for a long time. So we're going to be working through some of these relationship dynamics that are, really, sensitive, and, we have pain points and wounds that we didn't even know existed that were being triggered in that relationship. And maybe now the intensity of those painful points will become even more acute, right? So this is where you gotta do the work of surrendering and giving your mind over to the Holy Spirit. That's how you build these muscles, and that is the pressure cooker that will trigger the spiritual awakening, right? You need that pressure, oftentimes. Yeah? Okay.
It didn't really need to be like that. That's like so good to remember. Like none of this has to be painful, right? God's way is not painful, right? He needs happy learners. That's how we truly awaken the most, quickly. But we normally everybody I know, myself included, it seems to be the most painful are when I, reached for him and, no one else. And that's our greatest gains, usually. But it need not be, because we don't want to fear God in any way. So I never want to relate any of my suffering, ever. It need not have been had I turned to him for truth and guidance, rather than me thinking I knew how to do it and what was best. I didn't have to suffer.
And look at the way he languages this in paragraph 8 on page 78, that we're dealing with alternating investments in two types of perception. We're invested in being the body. We're invested in holding grievances. We're invested in blaming others. And we're learning how to invest in forgiving, in being the spirit, and showing that nothing can really harm us and we're under no laws but God's. Like, these are investments of perception. So did you ever have the experience where you get into a bad breakup or a bad argument or what have you with a relationship, and you hear like immediately, this was like the best thing that could have happened for you? Like, they cheated on you. They betrayed you. They showed you their true colors. Now you can see like this wasn't the right thing for you. You're on a different track. You're going towards integrity, and you're going to heal what was there for you while you were in that relationship. And then the other investment is, I got to get her back, or I got to get him back, or if I can only fix this. Or I'm going to pour sugar in his gas tank. I'm going to wait for him to get out of work and embarrass him in front of everybody. Right? These are alternating investments in perception. And slice his tires. The list goes on. But, oftentimes we're battling between...
Just like him. And then get another one, just like him.
So let's continue on page 78, paragraph 9. The spiritual eye literally cannot see error and merely looks for atonement. All of the solutions which the physical eyes seek dissolve in its sight. The spiritual eye, which looks within, recognizes immediately that the altar has been defiled and needs to be repaired and protected. Perfectly aware of the right defense, it passes over all others, looking past error to truth. Because of the real strength of its vision, it pulls the will into its own service and forces the mind to concur. This reestablishes the true power of the will and makes it increasingly unable to tolerate delay. The mind then realizes with growing certainty that delay is only a way of increasing unnecessary pain, which it need not tolerate at all. The pain threshold drops accordingly, and the mind becomes increasingly sensitive to what it would once have regarded as very minor intrusions of discomfort. So, oftentimes when we go through these transformations, one of the things that I find is people that have overcome addictions will oftentimes be able to understand what this dropping of the pain threshold means. That there was a time when, in full-blown addiction, I've heard, that you will do things and be things that are just, in a way very degrading to the self. And then when the higher power comes in, you begin to clean up your life. What once was just a night out becomes a horrible thought to ever consider again. Right? That there is a definite dropping of the pain threshold. This will never be me. Like when I look back at my life, what I was doing at 20, if I could shake that kid and say, "What are you thinking?" Right? because of where I could see now what I didn't see before. What was once joy is clearly stupidity and pain. This is what will begin to happen as this inner change takes place within the heart. You begin to naturally want to clean up your life, because the spiritual eye sees the defilement of the altar, and it begins to show you that's pain. And you don't want that in your life anymore. That's why oftentimes, again, if you're with the wrong partner, as an example, if they're reinforcing, a part of you that's not noble or kind or good, you will oftentimes find that you can't be in that toxic dynamic anymore. A lot of family relationships will break up when the spiritual eye opens and you begin to clean up your life. Right?
But you don't leave them. It actually happens for you. You have to see that they're there because they are thoughts and beliefs in your mind, and that's what they're representing. Then you ask for guidance and you speak the truth. And my experience is those relationships, they kind of just, back out into the, outer points of your life. Sometimes they come back. Don't chase them or pull them back. Sometimes they're not meant, but it's never like, they're not separate from you. So it's not like they're bad or they're not, where you are now and you leave, because you will just get some other one, just like a romantic relationship. It's all the same. It's all the same. So we have to heal the thought in the mind, that thought this could be. And then they can radically change and stay in your life. But if not, they won't be comfortable. So the way you leave them is by being so determined to only want to know and remember the truth of them. The complete opposite of what the ego will tell you. The ego will come up with a whole bunch of different judgments about them as well. This isn't good and this isn't where you should be, and they're going to keep you from your path. No, they are your path. Like, turn toward them, but fiercely with love. And that doesn't mean you have relationships physically with them. In consciousness, you're fierce with your love and determination to see them as He created them.
Yeah.
And also, that could be put in our life too to teach us.
Well, God doesn't make us learn through pain.
No,
but
but
He'll
just
take our-
for an
He'll use
awakening
it.
for me to see how, like, awakening to act a certain way, and then I'm like, wow, I really act this way, and to grow from that.
Yeah, He uses all the
All the
crap
things,
we
yeah.
make.
It's not that, let's
Yeah,
say,
so
For
like
fertilizer.
as you said, Lisa, so you go, then you'll just bring another one right back in.
Exactly. Yeah.
so if we have a deep sense of unworthiness, for example, we can have a very close relationship with a family member or a romantic partner that will reinforce that unworthiness. And so when we begin to wake up, they can be abusive or aggressive and violent to, basically continue to perpetuate that story we've had about ourselves. But then when we begin to wake up and feel differently about who we know ourselves to be, we will naturally set loving and healthy boundaries in that relationship. We will communicate from a different place within ourselves, so that that person will no longer perpetuate the, acts that were once tolerated, right? I will not tolerate the unlovingness anymore. It doesn't mean I don't love you, but if you're going to continue to show up toxic, you can't be in my immediate orbit until we recalibrate this. And you have every right to communicate that. You're not, like Lisa said, you're not throwing them out of your life, but if they refuse to show up in a way that's healthy and loving, you have every right to not tolerate that.
Okay, can I ask a question too? Because, like, my spouse is not interested in the course at all.
Get rid of them.
But,
That's okay.
he allows me to go on the path I'm going on. And, he kind of does his thing and I do mine. But, we get along well.
Yeah.
And we've been married for quite a while. And so we've had all those growing pains. And so, you know, when I look at him, I see the light in him. And so it's like, just let him be. And I've had plenty of opportunity to say go or go myself, but it's like, if I take myself out of his life, then I'm the only light he sees, that he might see. Like, do you know what I'm trying to say? I'm not like trying to teach him the course or anything,
Yeah.
but just the way that I have changed about the way that I talk about things. Like what Lisa said earlier about her grandmother. Well, like, I lost my son, and, it's like, I remember saying, like, I just miss him so much, it just makes me sad, because I just miss him. Like people said, he's here, he just went into another room, but it's so much better than that, because he's here. He's in you. You're in me. You're in me. We're all in each other because we're all one.
Yeah.
And, if I didn't have the horse.
And we become increasingly more willing to really experience what that means.
Right.
Right. And so, as we move through this learning, there are parts of us that we are used to being and identifying as that are going to feel this inner conflict, because the light's going to go here. Remember, it's going all the way to the inner altar where we're saying, I am this body. You can't get more intimate than that. It's your homing signal. It's where you think you are. And he's telling us again and again in the Course in Miracles, you're not where you think you are.
Right.
And you're not who you think you are. And so as the light gets closer and closer to where you think you are and who you think you are, you as the ego are going to feel threatened by that light. But at the same time, you want it. So this is the conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why we have the people in our life that we do, so that we can actually strengthen the love, so that the light can go deeper for us. So, you're in these relationships, and like Lisa said earlier, it's like, these are the perfect places where this work will get done. And it doesn't have to have all the labels of, the Holy Spirit this, and Jesus said that, and this workbook lesson, and my husband doesn't know any of that. Well, oftentimes, and I'm not saying this is your case, but oftentimes a lot of the people that don't know any of this are living it
Yeah.
far better than people that are studying it their whole life.
True.
So when you begin to see all love is God's love and forgiveness is forgiveness in whatever form or way it shows, like you begin to see God in your husband in a way that transcends labels.
Right.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sure.
And that also counts for, our most precious beloved ones. That, in a way, we have to remember, right? The labels that we put on, there are no sons, daughters, right? So, but they are our beloved, right? Our closest acceptance of love. So when they leave, right, it's a symbol, right? They're not real people. They're images, symbols, right? What do they represent? So when we have one that represents love, when they leave, for me, it pulls me closer to love in a way that nothing ever would. Like when he said, I so related to, it's our special relationships that keep us here. Totally got that. Had to admit that completely. I would have stayed just from my little angel puppy that was like, I'd come back for another 100 lifetimes, and I am ready, right? In pain, I would never leave that, even knowing she's an image I made. She was my most beautiful illusion, right? And it would have been enough. So yeah, so now, so determined and vigilant with my thought, the moment the ego comes calling with, well, you'll never feel her again, never do this again. It's like, no, right? She cannot be a body and be the light and love that he created. Right? I cannot join with her if I am missing her as a body. She is here right now, but I have to pick my thought system. And that pain I am feeling of loss is because I have left the truth, right? Because it's God. It's God that we're missing, and it's God that we're accepting.
But where does grief come in there?
It's
a
an ego
miscreation.
mechanism.
But we go through a natural grieving process as human beings because we are still convoluted in our understanding. So it does feel natural to go through a grieving process. And, there is a way of working through it that will be natural. But there is also a way of holding on that is unnatural and imbalanced. So you always want to be, with your finger on the pulse of where you're grieving from and why. And, oftentimes it can really turn into self-pity. Because what we're really grieving, and this might sound like a harsh and cold truth, but we're grieving over our own loss of what that person was for our ego, right? And so again, while we believe we're the ego, we're going to go through these experiences, but at the same time, we can start to master them and not be the slave of them.
And if we turn to Him with our grief, we are so open to receive then. Best downloads of my life. I went broken and tears of understanding in a way that I was not open to before.
Yeah, there's the
We
answer.
need to be broken.
Yeah.
I think we were talking about in yesterday's service in the poem of Hafiz, where he says, let the pain cut even deeper. Don't run away from it. Because what you'll begin to sense is it's actually the longing for the beloved. It's actually the longing for God that is really the pain that we're feeling over this loss. All loss is an echo of that original separation. Right?
So that's like the dark night of the soul that brings you to that transformation, right?
Yeah.
Which doesn't have to be a
When we-
loss, but usually is of something, some illusion.
And it's our reflex to cut it off, even when we're doing this work too quickly, right? For some things like pain, yeah, you want to do it right away. But for emotional relationships and a loss like that, it was just I just got from him this last time, allow it, and then I could see, I could feel, my body went to, because I got, that body was never alive, and my body felt dead and then numb, like nothing. But I had to go through that excruciating pain to get to it. And before I'd always stopped it because I thought it was the right thing to do, and many times it is, but listen, because He's guiding us all the time. Perfect for where you are then and what you're ready to accept, because we're not ready to accept, everything, all at once. It's completely letting go of everything that has made our world real. It's everything. So He'll do it with you. But go to Him to walk through it. Don't try to analyze it without Him. Hold on to His hand. Whatever works for you. I hold on to Jesus' hand when the going gets rough, and I feel Him. There's no doubt about it. And now I'm trying to learn to, for everything, go to Him like that. It doesn't have to be just those big things. Everything.
Shall we continue with our reading?
Forgot.
No, that was far better than anything. Let's go to page 376. Oh, perfect. Look at page 376, paragraph 3. The peace of your soul lies in its limitlessness. Limit the peace you share in your own soul and must be unknown to you. So your soul is your true nature, and your true nature knows no limit. If you deny your true nature by limiting the peace you share, This is always done in special relationships. You have your special love and you have your special hate partners. So it's always a limited. And then that the soul is denied, right? You sell your soul. Sell awareness of your soul. Now listen to this. Every altar to God is part of your soul. Right? So everyone's innermost essence is also a part of you. This is, something in A Course in Miracles that you have to be clear on. He says that God created distinct beings. And he created you as himself. So there's a simultaneous oneness and distinct individuality that is non-duality. That's the mystery or miracle of your creation. You are simultaneously one, unique, distinct being, and you're limitless in every being. That's the joy of it. You can't create more perfectly than that. We each get to individually experience everything as everything from our own unique place in God, as God. It's beyond words. It's ecstatic. And so every altar, her puppy, her grandma, every altar, right? What made Reina Reina is her altar. What made Grandma Grandma is her altar, her essence. And that altar is in our altar. Right? That's what every altar to God is part of your soul. Because the light he created is one with him. Would you cut a brother off from the light that is yours? You could not do so if you realized that you can only darken your own mind. As you bring him back, so will your mind return. That is the law of God for the protection of the wholeness of his one Son. So only you, he tells us, can deprive yourself of anything. Do not oppose this realization, for it is truly the beginning of the dawn of light. Remember also that the denial of this simple fact takes many forms, and these you must learn to recognize and oppose steadfastly and without exception. So what's the denial of this simple fact? I can only deprive myself of anything. But he says the denial of this simple fact takes many forms. In other words, I'm not depriving myself of everything. The government's depriving me of something. Right? It becomes a way of shirking the fact that I'm doing it all to myself. So it can take many forms. That person that just cut in front of me is denying me, getting to work on time. And I'm angry with them. So this shows itself in a multitude of forms, and that's why he says we must learn to recognize or discern and oppose steadfastly and without exception the game the ego's trying to play. So this is what he says. This is a crucial step in the reawakening. The beginning phases of this reversal are often quite painful. There it is again. The beginning phases of me knowing that I'm the only one who can deprive myself, and all my life I've been the only one that can deprive myself of anything. Even when I was in the womb, I was the only one that could deprive myself of anything. The beginning phases of accepting this are often quite painful. For as blame is withdrawn from without, there is a strong tendency to harbor it within. It is difficult at first to realize that this is exactly the same thing, for there is no distinction between within and without. If your brothers are part of you and you blame them for your deprivation, you are blaming yourself. and you cannot blame yourself without blaming them. That is why blame must be undone, not reallocated. Lay it to yourself, and you cannot know yourself, for only the ego blames at all. Self-blame is therefore ego identification, and as strong an ego defense as blaming others. So we'll have to pause here. Pause.
You can go ahead, I don't.
We're at 8:30.
Oh, because I didn't read Kate's.
So let's take some final comments here. Yes.
You mentioned the word hate. I have raised my children who are now adults that there is no hate, that we may choose to take ourselves out of an uncomfortable situation or avoid a situation, but it is a poor use of our energy to express that emotion, to be in that situation. And so I've always said, that means that that may be toxic to you, so step out of it. And don't hate, try to understand. Am I on the...
Well, the instruction is sound and good guidance. Don't hate. But it doesn't mean that there isn't still hate within the world. In fact, we may not like to hear this, but he actually says this universe was made in hate. That's a powerful statement. This whole universe was made in hate. He says, look at how life devours life. The whole predator-prey dynamic starts at the very low rungs of the chain of being, and it goes all the way up into multinational corporations destroying themselves, nations bombing, people torturing, women being abused for all reasons. Like, there is hate in this picture of our universe. We are to deny that it's real and bring love into our experience. But he says deep down we have to first confront, and this is why the conflict will be acute for a long time, we have to confront that the whole I am this body experience that we're having is our own self-hatred. That's really, why the conflict will be acute. We want to invest in God, we want to wake up, but at the same time we're going to be going right to the very heart of where evil is being projected from in us. We're going to have to see our denial of God, our rejection of God, and that is what he would call the self-hatred.
Well, that when I have those types of thoughts that are negative or uncomfortable, I go to the Ho'oponopono, where I simply say, whatever memories are in me that are the cause for this feeling, I'm sorry, please forgive me, I love you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And instantaneously, it's gone. But that's a ancient Hawaiian kind of way. Is that similar in context?
It wouldn't go to the root of what he's bringing us to, right? Because he's going to say that this whole universe, we're going to disappear it because it was made in hate. And we can't get into all of the nitty-gritties of this. This is a huge topic. But if this is resonating or not, you don't have to take my word for it. But this is his teaching, that the very heart of our I am identity is a denial of God's love in us. The denial of God's love in us gives me the opportunity to exist apart from God in my own consciousness. He says that is actually my attack on God, my separating from God. And that was all done and we pressed it very deeply now, in hatred, because we wanted to be special. And God didn't acknowledge that, and we revolted. So this is his teaching, that we gave birth to the ego as an expression of our rebellion and our hate against the wholeness. And that's why the universe looks so fragmented, chaotic, and violent. And it's all from within that we're projecting. So each one of us has to heal what he calls this ancient hatred. Right? And we'll end with this quote. He says, "The holiest spot on earth is where an ancient hatred has become a present love, where we give up being the ego. I am not John. I am not the body. Tell me who I am. I don't know. I don't know anything." And in that utter surrender and abandon of the ego and the world that it made, love can come back into my heart. And then I won't stay as a separate self doing prayers with other separate selves. I will have woken up to the one self. That's this teaching.
Thank you.
And you can remember too, what he tells us here, we're always only teaching ourselves, right? So your children, right, are really just your thought forms. So everything that you're saying to them, you can recall, things that you were teaching them. It was really just you teaching yourself. That's why I always lean in and I pay really close attention when anybody comes to me for any kind of help and anything, right? Because it's always, something for me there. And it's how we heal ourselves.
Very good.
Was
So-
the- have time?
No, actually,
Okay, that's fine.
I don't know.
No problem.
you don't have a...
How about this? I don't know if I ever used this before. Mary will.
Yeah, we just want to be honoring the time here. It's 8:37, so I know some people are on time concerns.
All right, well, we don't need to do it. How about, this is good. All I've ever had was God's love. What you have is a state of being. All I have, I am. That's deep, I shouldn't pick that one. How about I forgive, oh no, I did that.
Should we pray?
Oh, I didn't know you.
Yeah, it's almost 10 minutes past.
Good.
So just bringing our awareness to the quietness within the heart and recognizing that only joy is real and the love of God is within our heart. And so we come to a place of being willing and ready to open and accept that here and now. And we thank the Holy Spirit that whatever was said here that is a reflection of his love may it be remembered and embodied. Whatever was said that is out of alignment with his truth may it be forgotten and never brought to mind. And so